he has spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
I remember playing high school football and the idea that we had a fullback who was like, in the day they would have called him the refrigerator. He was thick, he was big, he was tough, he was hard to tackle. Wasn't super fast, but he was really hard to tackle. He could run through an offensive line, then through a defensive line, and run another 5 or 6 yards on a good day, carrying 5 or 6 people on his back. It was incredible. But I remember the coach saying of him one time, if you need 4 yards, he's your guy. If you're at 4th and goal and you got 4 yards to get to the goal, he's your guy. If you're at 3rd and 4 and you need 4 yards, he's your guy. He's always going to get 4 yards. If you're at 1st and 10, he's going to get 4 yards. 2nd and 9, yep, 4 yards. 3rd and 9, he's still going to get 4 yards. And when you know that about your best offensive running back, your best fullback, then you have to plan accordingly. You have to know that your defense is going to have to come up big if your offense can only score 4 yards at a time. Now, of course, that's why you have wide receivers and faster running backs, et cetera, but if you don't know your offense well enough to know what their capabilities are, what your weapons are, then your defense better be very, very good. And believe it or not, that is a leadership principle, and the one that I'm going to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and there are a lot of leaders out there today who simply don't get the concept that you've got to have both a good offense and a good defense. And by that I mean they feel like if we just do the right thing and we keep plugging away, then we don't have to pay any attention to what the opponent is doing. And by the opponent, it may be a competitor. It may be a political worldview that's different than your own. It may be a religious worldview that's different than your own. It may be the worst enemy to defeat, apathy. The enemy hardest to defeat is apathy. When no one really cares about what matters to you, to your organization, to your team, to your leadership, when they don't share your core values or your principles and they refuse to act on anything other than whatever comes today, that's when you find your hardest battles. See, when you know you're fighting an opponent or competing against an opponent that's really good at scoring but not really good at defense, then you might see a really high-scoring game. Whatever that game is, baseball, soccer, or football in Europe, American football, hockey, doesn't matter. Whatever the sport is, whatever the competition is, maybe it's NASCAR, maybe it's gymnastics, maybe it's golf. If the person that you're playing against or the competitor you're playing against is really good at scoring points, you've got to be really good at scoring points, or even better, at preventing them from scoring. One of the challenges with leadership these days is that we feel like many people have bought into the idea that we don't want to be offensive. We don't want to push back. We don't want to resist someone else's ability to succeed. In the kids arena, a lot of the scores have been abolished from acceptance. The idea that one team would have more points than the other at the end of a game seems to be like a social injustice. And so we just don't keep scores. Well, you may think so, but I promise you the kids are keeping score in their head because it's natural to want to know, after all the effort you've exerted, did I win or did I lose? And we also need to know as leaders that the balance of offense and defense, how much effort we put into gaining ground on our own ideologies, philosophies, and core values versus how much ground do we defend against losing to opposing ideologies, philosophies, and core values. That balance is an absolute imperative. Now, it may not be necessary, like a high school team here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area a few years ago, I believe it was Alito, ran up the score against an opponent to something like 65-8 in a single game. And there was a whole lot of brouhaha about the fact that they were flaunting their abilities. They were being coached to continue to humiliate the opposing team. Now, I can tell you I've played a game of darts with an opponent a while back. It's been a while. It's been a long while. But this opponent, Mike Arnold, had never played a game of darts before. But he had an impeccable ability to hit the bullseye. And when you hit the bullseye in a certain game that we like to play called cricket, when you hit the bullseye, every time you hit it, you can close them out by hitting 3 of them, and then you can begin to score on them. And it is one of the highest scoring spots on the board. You get more points for hitting that again and again than anything else. The irony was, it was obvious that his skill set was to hit that bullseye. And so the first time that I played him, it was a fairly close score because I didn't realize that he had a knack for hitting the bullseye, but there were other places on the board he couldn't hit. Because I knew the rules of the game, though, I was able to maximize his weakness. Something about that crossing pattern to hit the lower left side of the board and get it right into those doubles, which is a required hit. I think it's the double 18 on the bottom left of the board. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the 6. But on the bottom left of the board at about 7 o'clock of the board face, there's a double that you've got to hit on the outside ring. And something about his throwing style would not allow him to hit that spot. So in the second game, I knew I had to do 2 things. Number 1, I knew I had to close the bullseyes first because once I close them, he can't score points on them. And since he knew that he could run up the score and get 100, 200, 300 points really fast by hitting the bullseye again and again, I made my focus to hit the bullseye. And I hit the bullseye within about the first 10 shots. I was able to close them out, meaning he can no longer score on them. At that point, he already had about 75 to 100 points. And then I went around the business of closing the other things out. And it was a pretty fair race all the way around until we got to the bottom left corner. I attacked it early. I went from the bullseyes to the bottom left corner because I noticed in the previous game he had a hard time hitting that spot. Once I closed it out, that means every time I hit it by accident or otherwise, I score points. And I was able to run up the score to over 400 points, hitting a double, whatever that was, 18 or 6 or whatever it is on the bottom left corner. Because I knew what his weakness was, having played him before. Now here's the question. When it comes to winning and losing, is it necessary to win by an exorbitant margin? The answer is no. When it comes to winning and losing, the truth of the matter is, in a finite game that has a beginning and an end, you know it's going to be over when someone reaches a certain number of points or a certain amount of time has elapsed in that finite game, then you just score enough points to have more than the other person at the end. If you close out all your numbers and they still have numbers to close out, you win. If they close out all their numbers and you close out all your numbers and you have a higher score, even though they closed out first, you win. Well, that's the knowledge of the game that you're playing, right? In tennis, they have a very unusual way of keeping score, in my opinion. I've never successfully played a game of tennis, and so if you asked me to score someone else playing tennis, I wouldn't have a clue. What does that mean? It means my opponent has a distinct advantage because while I may know how to score, I wouldn't know if I've won or not. You could lie to me because I'm not well educated in that scoring. When it comes to football, I'm pretty familiar with American football and the majority of the rules, even though they tend to make them up and change them in the middle of the season on a regular basis, or so it seems. Some refs make up rules in the middle of the game. We've seen it. But for the most part, if you know what the rules are, you know when the game ends, and you know how to win the game, then you can go about the business of winning the game. And in order to win the game, whatever that game is, you only need have more points than the opponent at the end of the game. Here's a sad reality in leadership. Leadership is not a finite game. It's an infinite game. Whether you have 3 points ahead right now or 65 points ahead right now, the truth of the matter is the game doesn't come to an end until you're gone and can't play anymore. And when you're gone and you can't play anymore, the game will still carry on without you, with your legacy, with your prodigies, with the people that you have trained and empowered and encouraged to become leaders in your place. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your team, maybe it's a movement. But when you're gone and you can no longer play the game, the rules will no longer matter to you, but the rules that you've left behind, the strategies that you've put in place, the tactics that you've deployed, they will eventually determine who's winning and who's losing along the way. In the course of this infinite game of leadership and world dominance and politics as we know it, and global strategies and global socioeconomic manipulations, the pandemic was a game changer. Social media has been a game changer. The players who decide which rules are changed and who plays by what rules. Game changer. As I've said before, in most games, most specifically I will say it of billiards, I don't care where we play, and I don't care what the rules are. As long as the rules are equally applied to you and to me, I will find a way to beat you. I understand the game well enough, the physics well enough, the strategies well enough, and how to control the ball well enough that I will beat you even at your own rules as long as I know what those rules are. Where the game becomes unfair is when there are rules that apply to you, but not to me, and other rules that apply to me, but not to you. At this point, we've stepped beyond the rules of the game and we've begun to play something entirely different. And as we see the updates of various social medias and their involvement with various governments around the world, what we understand is that especially during the pandemic and especially during election cycles, others have been changing the rules in the middle of the game and playing by a different set of rules. And if you're playing in a game where you think your margin of win or loss is 3 points, and you're expecting the clock to run out any second, and you're not expecting to go into overtime, as has happened to the Cowboys a couple of times in the last couple of seasons, where they thought they had it in the bag, but in the last couple of seconds, nope, they were wrong. Same with the Vikings, same with the Giants, same with the Bucks. If you're playing to win by a small margin in a nick of time, and time doesn't run out, you're destined to lose. Yeah, maybe 65-8 is an exorbitant amount of scoring. It's an overreach. It's unfair. It's humiliating to the losing team. But when you realize all the points add up at the end of the season, and it's not just about the finite game you're playing right now, it's a winner-take-all game in the end. You better run up the score the best you can. You better have your offense at its top game. You better have your defense at its top game. Stop them from scoring or making up ground, and you be busy about the business of making up ground. I want to challenge you as a leader to ask yourself the question, are my strategies and my tactics designed in such a way that I win by the slimmest of margins in the nick of time? Or are they designed that if this is an infinite game, I can win today, tomorrow, and for decades to come, because the strategies we have in place are not short-sighted, they are long in nature? If you don't know the answer to that question, you better get a coach, a strategist who understands the long game and knows how to put you in a winning position. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.